Hey up! Right, in Wednesday's video I mentioned the 1 minute rule, and actually I was quite taken aback about the response that I got from that. A lot of people requesting some information on it, and that's relating to middle lane hogging on motorways. Now, I often get accused of this in videos because people don't pay attention to why I'm in the middle lane or what the circumstances around me are. They just decide that I've been in the middle lane for too long and that I'm middle lane hogging, or more specifically in this case right hand lane hogging, because most of the footage where I've been criticised it's been a 2-lane dual carriageway. And just to get it straight, this video is not about how to deal with middle lane hoggers, because as a civilian there's nothing you can do to deal with middle lane hoggers. That's a matter for the police. If you encounter one on the motorway, the answer to your conundrum is simple. If it's safe to do so and they're travelling slower than the speed limit, overtake them. If they're travelling at the speed limit, you've got no justification for overtaking them. So if the left-hand lane is empty, you should move into that left-hand lane. As civilians, there's nothing we can really do about their behaviour. There's no point getting angry about it, flashing your lights, sounding your horn. It achieves nothing. But the problem is, the highway code can be a bit confusing at times. On a 3-lane motorway, it tells you that you should cruise in the left-hand lane, and you should only move into the middle lane when you're overtaking a vehicle or overtaking a row of vehicles. And then when you've completed that overtaking task, you should move back into the inside lane. But it also tells you not to move in and out of lanes excessively, because obviously the act of changing lanes presents a hazard to yourself and other road users. So you need to minimise that to where it's strictly necessary, and this is where the confusion comes in for people. I think this is why people hog the middle lane. What constitutes overtaking a row of traffic? Because on our modern motorways there is always a vehicle in the left hand lane that's within your sight that is travelling slower than you. And what constitutes excessive lane changing? Because there is no guidance as to what either of these scenarios are in the highway code. This is all left to the interpretation of the reader. And this is where people get confused. I think in some cases people don't intentionally hog the middle lane. They're just uncertain as to what they should be doing, so they sit in the middle lane. Or you get the extreme opposite, something that perhaps you don't see that often these days, but you do see it. And that is a vehicle overtakes you, it pulls back into the inside lane, 3 seconds later his indicator's on, he's pulling back out again, he overtakes another vehicle, pulls back in again, and is weaving about all over the place, which is an obvious danger. The majority of accidents on motorways occur during lane changes or as the result of a lane change, or at junctions where traffic is joining the motorway, because obviously those are the scenarios where vehicles are most likely to come in conflict with each other. Now, back when I was a very young driver, there were 2 pearls of wisdom that were passed on to me. I've always followed that advice and it's always served me well. What I'm about to tell you doesn't constitute legal advice, and you may agree with it or disagree with it, it's up to you, but it goes like this. Now, back when I joined the police back in the early 1980s, your chances of advancement were severely limited if you didn't have a driving licence and a police driving authority. The scenario was that you would have to put yourself through a civilian driving test and then put in an application for a driving course to obtain your driving authority. And if you were successful, you would be put on the basic first 2-week driving course. The first of many driving courses that I would take throughout my career. And that consisted of you and one other pupil, another Bobby, being assessed and tutored by at least a highly qualified traffic sergeant to get you up to the standard that was expected of a police driver. Now, for the first week, you drove a plain car or an unmarked, for all intents and purposes, civilian car. Then at the end of that first week you would take a test supervised by an inspector or chief inspector of traffic, which was the most nail-biting 2 hours I've ever experienced. And if you passed it, the second week the tuition was carried out in a marked police car to be trained in more police-specific driving techniques. If you failed it, you went back to division and had to put your application in again. Now, during that first week of training, your average day would go something like this. You would drive for an hour. The sergeant wouldn't say anything to you apart from directing you where he wanted to go. At the end of that hour, you would pull over. The sergeant would give you a good bollocking for everything that you'd done wrong. And then it would be the other student's turn for an hour. And the day went on like that. You had about 3 driving sessions each per day. We would literally drive all over the county, doing hundreds of miles in a day, and on the third day it was all motorway work. And by the third day we were both nervous wrecks, because they weren't just assessing your driving, they were constantly assessing your demeanour, your emotional state. Any sign of aggression or agitation would get you a reprimand. Seriously, I was even reprimanded on one occasion for waiting at traffic lights and strumming my fingers on the steering wheel because that indicated impatience. Now, my first drive of that day on the motorway, I was convinced I'd done everything right. Keeping up with the flow of the traffic, paying particular attention to lane discipline, not staying in the right-hand lane too long, pulling over as soon as I'd finished an overtaking manoeuvre. I thought I'd got everything perfect. Then, eventually, after about an hour, he told me to pull in at the nearest motorway service station, and I got the biggest bollocking of my entire life. I remember it well that he likened my driving on the motorway to that of Dick Dastardly from Wacky Races. What he termed as grossly excessive lane changing. And that was when he introduced me to the concept of the 1 minute rule. Now, he was a superior officer to me, so I took it as a rule, but perhaps in this instance you should consider it the 1 minute guide, because it's not entrenched in any law book, it's just practical advice. And it goes like this: when you're in the right hand lane overtaking slow moving vehicles in the left hand lane, after each vehicle that you've overtaken, look at the next vehicle and make a judgment as to whether it's appropriate to move back into the left-hand lane. If your judgment is that once you've moved back into that left-hand lane, you will have to move back out of it again to overtake that vehicle in 1 minute or less, stay where you are. Then continually assess what that vehicle's doing as you're moving along, and be prepared to change that assessment if he turns off or he speeds up. Now, this particular manoeuvre here with this lorry in front of me is something that I've been picked up on 3 or 4 times in the comments section. It does seem like an inordinate length of time between me passing the last vehicle and finally catching up to the tailgate of this lorry. I'm travelling at the speed limit for that section of road, so there's no reason why anyone would need to overtake me. And I actually reach his tailgate at about the 50-second mark. In reality, if I had pulled into the left-hand lane, I would probably have had to start planning an overtaking manoeuvre after about 30 seconds, and it would have served no useful purpose to other road users behind me. Pulling into the left-hand lane for a minute or more gives other road users plenty of opportunity to pass if they need to pass you. That way you're not impeding other traffic. Now, the overtaking manoeuvre did take a little bit of time because we were both impeded by the 40-mile-an-hour limit, but I chose this clip specifically because it brings me onto that other pearl of wisdom that was handed down to me by that sergeant. People have jumped all over me because I remain in the outside lane after overtaking this lorry. And in actual fact, if I wasn't overtaking this lorry and I was already in the inside lane, I would have moved out to the right at this point. And that's because there's a concealed slip road allowing traffic to enter this dual carriageway on the bend. Now, you can't see this traffic as it's about to enter the dual carriageway, and they can't see you until you're on top of each other. So if I'm in the inside lane when I meet that slip road, there is a good likelihood of conflict. Now, granted, I have priority in this situation, and traffic entering this carriageway technically should give way. But that's often easier said than done. By moving over in advance, I gave ample space for this mobile home that was also towing a motor car to easily and safely enter the carriageway without any drama. Now, this is not just about being courteous, this is about looking out for other road users while you're driving. It also makes no mention of what to do in the highway code in this situation. But that sergeant on that day always told me to move out from the left-hand lane into the middle lane whenever I encountered traffic joining the carriageway from the left, if it was safe for me to do so. And that advice that he gave me is probably even more relevant on a fast-moving motorway. If traffic entering the motorway can't find a safe gap to integrate with the traffic, they're going to have to substantially slow down or even stop at the junction and wait. And trying to integrate with motorway traffic from a standstill is a spectacularly dangerous feat. There's no need to do it if you can clearly see that there's no traffic merging. And what I suppose I really ought to say is you're not under any obligation to do it. Accommodating other drivers in this way does make the motorway a safer place. If you're unable to move out because you're boxed in, which does happen, be prepared to slow down to give them space. Making it easier for them makes it safer for everyone. Now, back to the 1 minute rule or 1 minute guide. When you're in that right hand lane, make sure that you're travelling at a suitable speed. Don't dawdle, because that's just going to wind people up. And if someone starts tailgating you, move over and let them pass. Don't get into a battle of wills with them. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should have a stopwatch so that you can time it each time you sort of make this manoeuvre, but the human brain is remarkably good at observing and working out trajectories. You'll be surprised how easy this comes. It also makes travelling on the motorway a lot more relaxed and less fraught. Motorway travelling isn't a race, it's just a means of conveyance. None of us are perfect, we all make mistakes, we all mess up from time to time. But I found that these two concepts do work. It would take a very unreasonable mind to consider this middle lane hogging or right hand lane hogging. So if you're one of those people that do get confused by this scenario, give it a try and see how you go. Once again, thank you so much for watching this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would consider leaving a like, and if you're not a subscriber, subscribing to the channel. It does help me out. I will of course be back next week, so until then, please ride safely and I'll see you soon.